want you to turn to Matthew chapter 13. Wow. Great to see you. We are dealing with the parable of the sower, and we're going to be talking again about the seed tonight, which is a key in the involvement of the parable. There's been a whole day of controversy that's literally been taking place, and evidently it was so powerful in the life of Jesus that it made a shift in him. It caused him to come to some conclusions and make some decisions. In fact, it altered the entirety of his preaching, and he began to talk in parables. Evidently, up to this time, he's not been telling parables, so that takes a whole new idea as you begin to realize that all that he did in the Sermon on the Mount was not a parable. There's a difference between parable and illustrations. So he begins to tell parables, and the parable is actually given to us in chapter 13, verse 3, down through verse 9. And then Jesus gives his explanation for the parable, which leaves us very little wiggle room. It leaves us no room for interpretation. This is not, well, you think the parable means this, I think it means that, when Jesus himself has laid it out for us. And again, tonight we want to read his explanation for the parable, which begins at verse 18, Matthew chapter 13, verse 18. He says, "Therefore hear the parable of the sower. When anyone hears the word of the kingdom and does not understand it, then the wicked one comes and snatches away what was sown in his heart. This is he who received the seed by the wayside. But he who received the seed on stony places, this is he who hears the word and immediately receives it with joy. Yet he has no root in himself, but endures only for a while. For when the tribulation or persecution arises because of the word, immediately he stumbles. Now he who receives seed among the thorns is he who hears the word, and the cares of this world and the deceitfulness of riches choke the word, and he becomes unfruitful. But he who received seed on the good ground is he who hears the word, understands it, and indeed bears fruit and produces some 100-fold, some 60, some 30. Your life is in the story. Jesus, be the sower, be the seed, implant yourself into our lives, and distinctly, definitely, we will be affected by it. There will be some kind of response from us regarding what you have to say to us, the truth. So go beyond any words that might come from our lips and go to your own planting of the seed in the depth of our lives and hearts. We pray thee. In Jesus' name we ask it. Amen. The focus of the parable, according to Jesus, is on the soils. Isn't any question about that? He's not focusing on the sower, and he's not focusing necessarily on the seed. The whole deal revolves around the response of the soil itself. And of course, as you get into this explanation, his explanation, you understand that the soil is your life. So the truth, which is the seed, has come to your life, and you are responding one way or the other, or in some manner, to the seed of the word of truth. And your response is really the key to the entire flow of the parable. And he only gives 4 responses, which would lead you to say any response you make is going to be within the category of one of those 4 responses. So you are responding one way or the other. And of course, what he's after, what we're after, what we desire, what we want for our lives is the response that produces the 100-fold, 60-fold, 30-fold. That is his cry. And that's his explanation of the parable. As you get into this, you begin to realize there is a common element among the soil. In other words, every single soil has one single thing that is going on in all of them. In other words, you can't come to the wayside and say, oh, he got one treatment, but the stony ground got another treatment. No, they all had one single common element among them, and that one common element was the seed. The same seed that fell upon the wayside is the same seed that fell upon the shallow ground is the same seed that fell upon the thorn-infested ground, is the same seed that fell upon the good ground. There's only one seed. Now, we have noted up to this point in our study that there is no explanation of the sower. In other words, he gives no explanation about who the sower is, what the sower is like, how the sower sowed the seed. He gives no explanation for that. In other words, that's not in the perimeters of the point of the parable. Now, we know that the sower is Jesus himself, and that this sower is a key to everything that's going on. He does the same thing in relationship to the seed, which we want to talk about tonight again. And the seed is not mentioned in any kind of explanation, except for one little phrase, which is more than was given for the sower. And the explanation that he gives is in verse 19. When anyone hears the word of the kingdom. So Jesus calls the word of the kingdom the seed. That's his only explanation for it. And again, the common element of all the soils is this seed has come to every soil, and there is a response. Now, wouldn't it be interesting if the history books, in truth, of your life would write nothing but your response to truth? In other words, you go back into American history, for instance, and you read about Abraham Lincoln, and you read about all this stuff that he did. He studied at night, became a lawyer, studied at night before a fireplace. He was raised in the Kentucky area, and all this historical information. Wouldn't it be interesting if really the true history of Abraham Lincoln is how he responded to the soil, to the seed? How he as a soil responded to the seed. That is the whole history of your life. In other words, the history of your life doesn't record how you were a phenomenal athlete and you did such and such, or you were a phenomenal show person and you were a star and everybody. None of that history is included. In fact, none of that kind of stuff even matters. That your whole history is going to be wrapped up in not how many churches you built, how many people came to know Christ under your leadership, how many people were taught, maybe none of that. Wouldn't it be interesting if all that's going to be on the pages of the history of your life is how you have responded to the seed, the word of the kingdom? If that is true, there's only one thing that matters tonight. That's your response. And evidently, as you walk through the responses, you get the feeling, and we'll get into this stronger at another time, but you get the feeling that you have a direct responsibility in the kind of soil you are. That you create that in your own life. I suggested to you 2 Saturday nights ago in relationship to the seed, the first idea, and I'm walking you through an outline now. The first idea, first part of the concept that he's giving us in relationship to the seed itself is the concentration, the sower. In other words, the sower has a concentration, and the concentration of the sower is, his focus is the seed. He's all wrapped up in the seed. His big deal is the seed. And if you say, well, how do you know that? Why, come on, the very fact that they call him sower emphasizes the whole fact that his whole deal, what he's about, everything about him, man, I could talk for hours about this, and you probably think I do. Everything about him is wrapped up in the sowing. He doesn't do anything but one single thing, and that is sow seed. His whole driving purpose of life is to get you the truth. Everything he's about, every time he sticks his finger in the middle of your life, every time he manipulates the circumstances, even as he uses every bad thing that you have created or comes to your life, he's always trying to get one single thing done. He wants to get truth. into your life. That's his whole focus. So you've got the concentration, the sower. The first idea under that is focus. His total focus is plant the seed. Get the truth in your life. And we talked about that. The second idea under concentration, the sower, is the first idea, focus. The second idea is freeholder. He is the owner of the seed. The seed is what has come out of his nature. So the seed is good. So there's not, well, some seed was good, some was bad. Oh, yeah, that sat around too long and rotted. It's not that. In other parables, wheat and tares, there's the good seed, the good wheat seed, and the tares. But an enemy sows the tares. So the sower in our passage is always sowing truth, and he never, ever sows deception. So if he comes and plants truth into your life, you can be rest assured there is no deception in it, and it is exact truth. Third idea, concentration, the sower. The focus, he's focused on sowing and getting the truth into your life. Freeholder, it's his truth because it spills out of his nature. So this is really all about him. Third idea is faith. He evidently has total, absolute confidence in the seed. Thought a lot about this. See, it isn't seed plus fertilizer. See, it isn't seed plus it isn't seed and it's just seed. His total operation in your life is to implant truth. And if truth doesn't do it, it won't be done. And all he's asking you to do is to respond to the truth, the seed. Now, that brings us to where we want to be tonight. The second idea, concentration, the focus. Tonight we want to talk about Christ, the seed. This is phenomenal. The first idea, the form. Do you know what the form of the seed is? Well, it's Jesus. Jesus is the seed. Now, wait a minute. I thought Jesus was the sower. He is. Now you're telling me he's the seed. Yes, he is. In fact, he's all in all. He's the whole deal. That doesn't surprise you, does it? That Jesus himself would be the truth. I am the truth. And when God wanted to give you truth, he put it in the form of the person called Jesus. And Jesus is the total, absolute operation and existence of the truth itself. Jesus is the seed. Now, if you think I'm just making that up, let me involve you in the scriptures because it's all over the biblical truth. When you go back to Genesis, the first sin, Adam and Eve had just entered into sin, the fall. Lo and behold, God shows up on the scene. And what does God do? He begins to give the first messianic promise. And you know what the promise was? I'm going to turn this thing around. I'm going to restore you back to what you fell from. I'm going to come, and what's happened inside of you is so radical that it's literally revolutionized your entire nature and inner system. And I'm going to turn that whole thing around, not by magic tricks, not by just speaking like I spoke the worlds into existence. I'm going to turn that whole thing around, and the way I'm going to do it, he said, is that the seed, the woman's seed, will bruise, talking to the devil, the woman's seed will bruise your head. And your seed will bruise his heel. Now, obviously, there's a parallel between head bruise and heel bruise. So the head bruise is a devastating, destructive death step. So he says what's going to bring everything that's going on in your life to death and revolutionize, turn this whole thing around is the seed of the woman. First messianic promise. Now, Paul picked up on that. And he picked up on that, and I want to read this to you because this is, and we've read it before, this is so significant in relationship to this. In Galatians chapter 5, Paul is talking about the Israelites and the promises that have been given to Abraham and the Israelites. And here's what he says. Galatians 5, verse 16. He says, I say then, walk in the Spirit, and you shall not fulfill the lust of the flesh. For the flesh wars against, that's not the passage. I'm sorry. Well, can you help me? Galatians chapter 5. Promises to Abraham. Well, apologize. Chapter 4, 21, 22. Oh, chapter 4, 21, 22. No, that isn't the passage. That's close, but it's not the passage. I can't believe this. 28 of chapter 4. This is an example to the, here it is, chapter 3. This is an example to the students of what not to do. Try to give you a well-rounded education. Chapter 3. Yes, verse 16. So the verse was right. And it's chapter 3. And it probably, I wrote chapter 3, but my eyesight is so bad I couldn't read it. So chapter 3, verse 16, he says, now to Abraham, which would be all the Israelites, and to his seed, and did you notice it's capitalized? Were the promises made, he does not say, and to seeds, as to many, but as to one, and to your seed, capitalized, who is Christ. So I'm proposing to you tonight the seed, biblically, is always Jesus. So Jesus is the seed. That's absolutely phenomenal. Now, another proof of this is the idea of logos. You remember that the word logos is the Greek word for word. And, of course, Jesus describes in verse 19 that the seed is the word logos of the kingdom. So if the seed is the word of the kingdom, then the logos is the word. And in the beginning was the word. The Word was with God, and the Word was God. And we all, of course, know that is Jesus. So Jesus is the very seed. And we'll talk about that logos idea in a minute. So I'm proposing to you tonight that the very truth that Jesus wants to implant in your life is none other than himself. That outside of the person of Jesus, there is no truth. That all truth is contained within the perimeters of his nature and who he is. And if you find any truth outside of Jesus, then you immediately know it's not truth, it's deception. It only looks like truth. So truth is totally, absolutely defined in terms of the person of Jesus Christ. That becomes very, very, very significant. If you want to know the truth about God, you must look at Jesus. So in the first place, what you've got is Jesus is the truth about God. If you have any questions about God and who he is and how he operates and how he thinks and what's going on inside of him and how he approaches people and what he wants and the direction he's going on and the motive in his inner heart and mind, you have to come back to Jesus. Jesus is the total explanation and revelation and demonstration of the person of God. Did you hear me? Jesus is the total explanation, demonstration, and representation of all the truth that is found in the heart of God. So if God is the one that instigates all truth, it is all instigated in the person of Jesus, and Jesus is the total revelation and demonstration of that truth. And outside of the person of Jesus, there is no truth. Now, if that is true, think this through, because people are always asking me this, and some of you have and or will as well. If you come to an Old Testament and you say, "Oh, look what God did," you cannot interpret that in light of the Old Testament. You have to come into the New Testament and look at Jesus and interpret what's going on in God in that passage through Jesus, because Jesus is the total revelation of God. You do not interpret God in an Old Testament apart from Jesus and say, "Oh, God is like this." Then come into a New Testament and say, "Oh, God has changed his mind." No, God has not changed. The Old Testament God is the same as the New Testament Jesus, because Jesus is the total revelation of that God. And if you find something confusing about God in an Old Testament, you immediately have to come into the New Testament, view it through the eyes of Jesus, and make your interpretation and knowledge of what's going on in that passage through the eyes of Jesus. Yes, that changes everything. Now, if Jesus is only the partial revelation of God, then hey, God may act ways beyond what we know and beyond what we can understand, and he may do things that are contrary to this partial. But Jesus is not the partial. He is the full and complete revelation of God. And outside of the person of Jesus, there is no truth. Which means, about God, which means if you stumble into the reality of another world religion and they have some truth, guess where they got it? They got it from Jesus. Because there is no truth about God outside of Jesus. Jesus is the total, absolute revelation of God. No wonder Paul yelled and screamed in Colossians, various other places it's revealed, that he is the visible image of the invisible God. That the God who's never, ever been seen has now stepped into our world. And we have found a revelation of that God. And we know what he looks like. We know how he acts. We know how he thinks. There is no question about how he handles himself, what his intent is. We've seen Jesus. How does God feel? Look at Jesus. How does God forgive? Look at Jesus. How does God embrace? Look at Jesus. How does God care? Look at Jesus. Look at Jesus. Look at Jesus. How powerful is the life of God? Look at Jesus. What does death do to the life of God? Look at Jesus. Can sin conquer the life of God? Look at Jesus. Look at Jesus. Look at Jesus. How far will God go to embrace you? Look at Jesus. Look at Jesus. All your questions are answered in Jesus. Look at Jesus. Look at Jesus. Now, follow this. God is revealed in the person of Jesus. So Jesus tells the truth. He's the seed that tells the truth about God. And you know why he's the seed that tells the truth about God? Because he tells the truth about man. What would you like to know about the human being? Look at Jesus. Jesus is the revelation of the truth about man. Now, you just said he's the truth about God. Yes, and the reason he's the truth about God is because he's the truth about man. Because man was built for one single purpose, and that was to be the truth about God. So if Jesus is the truth about God, he's the truth about man. Repeat that back to me. That's significant. See, Jesus is the revelation and the truth about God. Why? Because he's the revelation and the truth about man. Well, how can he be the truth about God and the truth about man at the same time? Because man was built to be the truth about God. Therefore, when you are the truth about God, you are really in the true spot that God built man to be. God built, created you to be a demonstration of the truth about himself. Hey, we've talked about this. It's not theologically correct to discuss the idea that God has a problem, because he can't have problems. But, just for thought process, he built an entire world, physical world. But he's invisible, so his world is never going to get to see him. We'll never know him. We'll never know how he feels. We'll never have any kind of expression of him because he's invisible. So here's a whole physical existence with an invisible God. So God said, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to build myself a human being. And he planted the human being in his own image so he could fill that human being, and through that human being could give a demonstration of himself to his world. So now a whole physical, visible world could literally lay their eyes on a physical, visible demonstration of God, which is Jesus, the man. You were built to tell the truth about God. And whenever you don't tell the truth about God, you are just that much less than who you ought to be. Did you ever wonder why God gets so upset when you steal a pack of gum? Why would he care? I mean, like streets of gold, and we're ripping off a pack of gum, and he's upset. Why would he care? But he gets all bent out of shape and convicts me and makes me feel bad, and then we're all upset, and everybody's upset. My wife's upset, the church is upset, everybody's upset. All over a package of gum. What's the big deal? God says, I'll tell you what the big deal is. I am God! And I built you to be a demonstration of who I am. And when you go around stealing, you know what you're saying? God's a thief! And God says, I am not a thief, and I just can't have you telling people I am. I just can't have you telling people I am. Because I built you to tell the truth. Be a demonstration of the reality of my person. And I just can't have you going around doing that. So it isn't the pack of gum. It's that you were built to be the visible demonstration of the invisible God. And when you don't demonstrate the truth, then you're saying God is and he isn't, and you confuse your world. When you're discouraged, down in the dumps, life presses in, you're just overwhelmed, you're just stepped on, you know what you're saying to your world? God's like that. He is not like that. He is not discouraged. He's not buffaloed. And God says, I just can't have you going around telling people I'm that way. Just can't do it. So the essence of sin is the false demonstration of the person of God through you. Can you imagine, can you figure out why our town is confused about God? They've looked at us. We love some people, don't love others. We care about something, not so much for others. We have prejudices. Sometimes we are, sometimes we aren't. We're up, we're down. Jesus is the seed. He is the truth about God. Why? Because he's the truth about man. And if you want to know what you are to be, look at Jesus. And if you want to know what God is like, look at Jesus. And the same identical nature of God that filled the person of Jesus can fill you. And you can tell the truth about God. Wouldn't it be something if this community of ours has not really rejected God, they've only rejected the God we've shown them. And if they really saw Jesus, they'd say, oh, I want him. The seed. So, I'm saying to you, the form of the seed is the person of Jesus. And he is planting himself in you. Jesus, my whole history, everything I am, everything I've done, everything I've proposed is all going to be boiled down on a single page about what kind of soil I am in relationship to my response to you. And history won't record sermons, won't record athletic accomplishments, won't record wealth and buildings built, won't record any of the things we accomplish in our lives. Our history will all be boiled down to truth came, you the truth, and how did I embrace you? Oh God, break down all the walls between you and me. Oh God, all the games I play with you, remove them. Oh God, everything that makes me hesitate in relationship to embracing you, all my fears that keep me locked inside, remove them. Give us here tonight a moment of total, absolute freedom where you literally come and plant yourself, the seed, in our lives. And if you do that, we will embrace you. We will open to you, to the depth of our life, that rootage might take place. And that we might produce the image. Be the visible demonstration of who you are. Forgive me, God, when I have demonstrated myself the weakness of my own flesh, the patheticness of my own existence, the wickedness of my own heart, the selfishness of my own character. I've demonstrated that instead of you. Heads are bowed. Get out the history book of your life. What's your response? To the implanting of truth, the person of Jesus. Not ideas, not concepts, but his person. Would you jump into the depth of his heart tonight? Would you just fall into the warmth of his character and life? Would you let him envelop you in absolute trust? Would you relax in him? And would you allow him to bathe you in the resource of his forgiveness and strength, that through you he might be seen? You will respond tonight. You will respond. Be obedient.